My name is Sloan, and if you've ever felt like your voice was swallowed by the room, then you already know me. If you've ever been the one holding the map while someone else held the microphone and took the credit, you know my story. So before I tell you what happened, before I lay out the architecture of my quiet revenge, do me a favor, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments if you've ever been the silent one, the one in the background holding it all together. It just helps to know I'm not screaming into the void. For years, I was the ghost in our family's machine. The business, Rhodes Imports, was a beautiful, chaotic thing, a boutique importer of old-world, handcrafted goods. We sold stories as much as we sold products: Tuscan leather, Portuguese ceramics, Scottish textiles, woven on looms older than our country. My father was the founder, a man whose personality was a tidal wave of charm and booming laughter. My older brother Reed was his echo, a younger, sleeker version, with a perfect smile and a talent for making a simple handshake feel like a coronation. He was the face of the brand, the one featured in lifestyle magazines, his arm draped casually over a bale of hand-dyed merino wool. And me. I was the logistics, I was the accounts, I was the supply chain, I was the 3 a.m. phone calls to a shipping freighter stuck in the Suez Canal. I was the wire transfers in 6 different currencies. I was the quiet dinners in tiny, family-run workshops in the hills of Umbria, learning the names of an artisan's children before I ever dared to ask about their production capacity. I built the entire operational skeleton of Rhodes Imports, bone by meticulous bone. What my father and brother never understood was that the skeleton wasn't just steel and process. It was built on trust. It was built on relationships, so personal, they were practically familial. These artisans, these master craftspeople, didn't work with Rhodes Imports. They worked with Sloan. The day my father retired, he called us into his oak-paneled office. The room smelled of old leather and his cloying, expensive cologne. Reed stood beside the fireplace, looking confident, looking like a man who already knew the outcome. I stood by the window, my hands clasped behind my back, a familiar posture of quiet observation. My father cleared his throat, a sound like gravel turning over. He looked at Reed, and his eyes were filled with a pride that had always felt foreign to me. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were filled with something closer to pity. He told me, "Sloan, you're the best operations manager I've ever seen. You're dependable, you're meticulous, but you lack the vision to lead." He said it so simply, so factually, as if commenting on the weather. He said, "Reed has the spark, the forward-thinking dynamism. This company needs to grow. The future is about brand, about image. Reed understands that." My heart didn't break. It just went cold. It was the same feeling as touching a block of dry ice, a burn so immediate and so deep it feels like nothing at all. I didn't fight it. I didn't argue that vision is meaningless without a foundation to build it on. I didn't scream that my logistics were the only reason his vision ever left the page and became a product on a shelf. I just nodded. I said, "I understand." And in that moment of quiet acquiescence, I saw a flicker of relief in my father's eyes and a flash of triumphant condescension on Reed's face. The entire company, my life's work, was handed to my brother. I simply walked away. I didn't take a vacation. I didn't collapse. I took my savings, leased a small sterile office with a view of a brick wall, and filed the paperwork for Sloan Global Artisans, a consulting firm. It sounded small, unimpressive. It was meant to. For a month, the silence was deafening. No frantic calls from customs agents, no late-night emails from weavers, just the hum of my new laptop and the drip of the coffee machine. I was building a new kind of blueprint. And then, exactly 1 month to the day after I left, my phone rang. It was Reed. His voice wasn't smooth or charismatic. It was tight, high-pitched, a wire pulled to its breaking point. "Sloan," he said, his voice cracking. "What did you do? Every one of our key suppliers, every single one, has terminated their contracts. They invoked a key person clause I've never even heard of. They said the business relationship was with an individual, not the company. They won't even take my calls, Sloan. They said they would only speak to you. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The aftermath of that meeting in my father's office wasn't a dramatic storm, but a slow creeping frost. I walked out of that building, the headquarters of Rhodes Imports, a place where I knew every squeaky floorboard and the precise hum of the aging HVAC system, and I didn't look back. I felt a strange and unsettling calm, the kind that follows a massive explosion. The ringing in my ears had stopped, and all that was left was a hollow silence. My father's words, "You lack the vision to lead," echoed, not with malice, but with a profound, almost clinical, detachment. It was a diagnosis, delivered without empathy. He wasn't just giving the company to read, he was defining me, codifying my role in the family narrative forever. I was the support structure, the scaffolding, necessary, yes, but meant to be dismantled and forgotten once the building was complete. My apartment that night was a tomb. I sat on my sofa, the city lights, paintings, sterile patterns on the wall, and I didn't move for hours. The private breakdown, when it came, wasn't tears. It was a deep, shuddering cold that started in my bones and worked its way out. It was the physical manifestation of being erased. All those years, all those late nights, all the personal sacrifices, for what? To be dismissed as a function, a cog in a machine my brother was now licensed to drive. I had given my life to this company, to this family, and in one 5-minute conversation, they had made it clear that my contribution was administrative, not foundational. They saw me as the person who filed the paperwork for the patent, not the one who made the invention possible. My mind began to drift back, a slideshow of slights and paper cuts accumulated over 15 years. I remembered the time we were on the verge of landing our biggest account, a luxury hotel chain that wanted exclusive rights to our Portuguese ceramics line. In EBO 4, the deal was faltering because the head artisan, a proud, stubborn man named Tiago, felt our proposed payment terms were disrespectful to his craft. My father and Reed tried to strong-arm him with corporate jargon and threats of finding another supplier. It was a disaster. I flew to Porto on my own dime, spent 2 days not in a boardroom, but in Tiago's dusty workshop. I didn't talk contracts, I talked about his grandfather, who started the business with a single wheel. I talked about the specific mineral composition of the local clay that gave his pieces their unique character. I listened to his fears about mass production, diluting his family's legacy. On the third day, over a simple lunch of grilled sardines and bread, we sketched out a new agreement on a napkin. It wasn't about numbers. It was about honoring his process, guaranteeing quality control, and creating a tiered system that paid him more as the hotel chain's orders grew. He signed with us because he trusted me. When I got back, my father patted me on the back and said, "Good work, Sloan. Glad you sorted the paperwork." At the company-wide meeting, Reed presented the newly won hotel contract as a testament to his own tenacious negotiating skills. I just stood at the back of the room and watched. Then there was Elena. My mind lingered on Elena because she was more than a supplier. She was the heart of our Tuscan collection, in a way, a link to my own past. She was a master weaver from a small, forgotten village in the hills outside Florence. Her family had been creating textiles on the same 4 looms for 200 years. I hadn't found her through a trade show or a sourcing agent. I found her because my mother, before she passed away, had owned a single beautiful scarf from that village. After she was gone, I became obsessed with finding its origin. It took me a month of poring over old maps and making clumsy phone calls in my broken Italian, but I found her. Elena was in her late 60s then, with hands as nimble and sure as a surgeon's and eyes that held the entire history of her valley. Our first meeting wasn't a business negotiation. She served me coffee in a tiny chipped cup and told me about how her husband had been ill, how the younger generation was moving to the cities, and how she feared she would be the last of her line to work the looms. The business arrangement we created was secondary to the friendship we forged. I didn't just buy her textiles. I helped her set up a small apprenticeship program with a grant I found from a European craft preservation society. When a freak mudslide damaged her workshop, I organized a Friends of Roads fundraiser, framed as a corporate charity initiative, to raise the money for repairs. Reed had rolled his eyes at the effort. He said, "Sloan, for what we pay her, we could get 10 times the volume from a factory in Turkey. You're getting emotional about a rounding error." He didn't understand. Elena's trust wasn't a rounding error, it was the entire asset. Her textiles were our highest margin products, the cornerstone of our brand's claim to authenticity. Our clients didn't just buy a blanket, they bought the story of Elena, a story I had carefully and respectfully cultivated, a story Reed now owned, but could never tell. This was the part of the equation my father, with his talk of vision, had completely ignored. The vision for a global brand, built on artisan trust, was mine. I had built it quietly, in the background, while Reed was busy being photographed for the cover of a trade magazine. The irony was so bitter, it almost choked me. They thought my strength was logistics, but my real strength was empathy. And in their world, empathy was a liability, a soft skill that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. So they discarded it. They discarded me. The cold in my bones began to recede, replaced by a slow, rising heat. It wasn't rage, it was a terrifying, clarifying calm. The kind of calm an engineer feels when they look at a flawed design and know, with absolute certainty, that the entire structure needs to be demolished and rebuilt from the ground up. The system wasn't just broken, it was built on a lie. The lie was that Reed was the visionary and I was the functionary. The lie was that charisma was more valuable than trust. The lie was that Rhodes Imports owned those supply chains. They didn't, I did. They were mine, not legally, not on paper, but in a way that was far more permanent. They were built on handshakes, on shared meals, on promises kept, on respect given and received. The turning point, the catalyst that solidified my resolve, came 3 days later. A small, lumpy package arrived at my apartment. There was no return address, just a string of Italian stamps. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small, exquisitely woven square of fabric, no bigger than my palm. The pattern was a complex geometric design in deep blues and silvers, a signature of Elena's work. Tucked inside was a small, stiff card. On it, in her spidery, elegant script, were just 3 words in Italian. La tua vera casa. Your true home. She didn't know what had happened. She couldn't have. This was just a gift. A small token between friends. But it felt like a sign. It was a reminder of what was real. Of what I had actually built. My true home wasn't the glass and steel office of Rhodes Imports. It was this network of trust, this invisible architecture of personal connection that spanned continents. And in that moment, I knew I wouldn't let them have it. I wouldn't let them strip mine my life's work for parts. They thought they had inherited a kingdom, but they had been left with an empty castle. The keys were in my pocket. That was the end of my grieving. In the quiet one, was done being quiet. I went to my laptop, the screen illuminating my face in the dark apartment. I wasn't going to fight them for the old company. That was a losing battle. A game played on their turf by their rules. I was going to build a new one. In a port, I opened a fresh document and typed the name I had registered just a day before. Hello, Global Artisans. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that, over and over again. It wasn't about revenge, it was about correction. It was about rebalancing an equation that had been wrong for a very, very long time. The heat in my chest wasn't anger anymore. It was a furnace, and I was ready to start forging. The idea that I had a secret plan implies a level of premeditated malice that I don't think I possessed. Not at first, but what I did possess was foresight. For years, I had operated with the quiet, persistent anxiety of a person who knows they are the only one holding the emergency brake. I had watched my father grow more detached, more enamored with Reed's superficial charm. I had watched Reed take credit for my wins, again and again, with a practiced ease that suggested he genuinely believed his own press releases. It wasn't a single event that made me prepare. It was the slow, steady erosion of my position, the death by 1,000 paper cuts. So while I never planned to be pushed out, I had, in a sense, packed a go bag. My contingency plan wasn't a single dramatic document locked in a safe. It was a distributed network of assets and information, a system I had built in parallel to my official duties at Rhodes Imports. It started with my personal record keeping. For every deal I negotiated, for every relationship I built, I kept 2 sets of notes. The first was the official version, uploaded to the company's shared server, a collection of contracts, pricing sheets, and shipping manifests. It was the what. The second set of notes was mine alone, stored on an encrypted personal hard drive. This was the why and the how. It contained the personal details: Elena's favorite type of coffee, the name of Tiago's grandson, who had just started his apprenticeship, the anniversary of the day a supplier in Scotland had taken over his father's mill. It documented the favors I had done, the crises I had averted, the personal promises I had made. It was a detailed ethnography of my supply chain, a human-centric database that was, in reality, the company's most valuable and completely unlisted asset. My father saw it as my hobby. Reed saw it as a waste of time. I saw it as the foundation. Then there were the allies. You can't be the quiet one, holding things together for 15 years without people noticing who is actually doing the work. My most important ally was a young man named Marco. I had hired him 5 years earlier as a junior logistics coordinator. He was smart, ambitious, and drowning in the chaotic, high-pressure environment that Reed's lack of interest in details had created. Reed would make a promise to a client. Of course we can get you 500 units by Tuesday, without any concept of production lead times or customs clearance. It was Marco and I who would stay up all night, working the phones, rerouting shipments, and absorbing the anger of the suppliers who were being asked to do the impossible. I mentored him. I taught him how to navigate the complexities of international freight, how to talk to artisans with respect, how to anticipate problems instead of just reacting to them. I saw his potential and quietly paid for him to get advanced certifications in supply chain management. My father had approved the expense without a second thought, assuming it was a minor departmental training cost. Reed didn't even know who Marco was, but Marco was fiercely loyal to me. He saw the injustice long before I was willing to admit it to myself. He was my eyes and ears inside the company. After I left, the one who would give me the ground truth, not the corporate spin. The third pillar of my secret plan was the most subtle and the most powerful: the legal framework of the supplier agreements themselves. Years ago, when we were first formalizing our relationships with some of the smaller, more independent artisans like Elena, our corporate lawyer had drafted a standard boilerplate contract. It was dense, full of legalese, and designed to protect the company at all costs. When I read it, my stomach churned. Presenting this to someone like Elena would be an insult, a clear signal that we saw her as a vendor, not a partner. It would destroy the very trust I had worked so hard to build. So, I took a different approach. I hired my own consultant, an expert in international trade agreements, with a focus on artisan cooperatives, using my own money. Together, we drafted a different kind of contract. It was simpler, written in clearer language, but it contained a very specific and very deliberate piece of architecture. We called it the Relationship Integrity Clause, though it was more commonly known in some legal circles as a key person clause. It's not standard in most manufacturing or supply agreements, which is why Reed's lawyers would have likely skimmed right over it, assuming it was feel-good fluff. It stipulated that the agreement was predicated on a continued, positive, and productive working relationship with the designated primary relationship manager. In every single one of those contracts, for our top 20 most critical, high-margin artisans, I had designated that manager by name, Sloane Rhodes. The clause went on to state that should the primary relationship manager cease to be employed by Rhodes Imports for any reason, the artisan had the right, at their sole discretion, to review and terminate the agreement within a 30-day window. It was a plausibly deniable detail. To my father and our lawyers, it looked like I was simply formalizing my role. To the artisans, it was a guarantee. It was me saying, if I'm not here to protect you from the corporate machine, you are not trapped. I am your firewall, and if that firewall is removed, you have a way out. It was a seed I had planted years ago, a legal escape hatch that only I knew how to open. I was betting on the fact that my family's arrogance would prevent them from ever reading the fine print. It was a good bet. So when I walked out of that office, I wasn't just walking away with my personal effects. I was walking away with the institutional knowledge, the loyalty of the key operational staff, and the legal keys to the entire supply chain. My new company, Sloane Global Artisans, wasn't just a consulting firm. That was a smokescreen. The real plan was to convert it into a new, ethically focused import house. A house built on the same foundation of trust I had already laid, but this time, with my name on the door. The first few weeks were a blur of focused, silent work. I didn't reach out to a single artisan. I didn't poach. I didn't send a single email hinting at what had happened. That would have been clumsy, vindictive. My strategy had to be clean, unimpeachable. I had to let them make the first move. Instead, I focused on building the vessel. I secured a line of credit. I leased a small warehouse space. I built a website that was clean, elegant, and focused on the stories of the artisans, putting them front and center. Marco was my covert source of information. He'd call me from his personal cell phone during his lunch break. His voice a low whisper. He told me how Reed was trying to streamline my systems, how he had replaced my carefully negotiated shipping schedules with a one-size-fits-all logistics software that was already causing chaos. He told me Reed had tried to call Elena directly to discuss scaling up her production. The call had apparently lasted less than a minute. Elena had politely informed him that all operational discussions went through Sloane. I knew the 30-day clock was ticking. The artisans, upon learning of my departure, which Reed would have been contractually obligated to inform them of, though I'm sure he did it in the most dismissive way possible, would be evaluating their options. They would be talking to each other. I had built them into a community, not just a list of suppliers. They shared information. They trusted each other because they all trusted me. The plan was not to detonate a bomb. The plan was to simply open a door. I was building a new home, a safe harbor. All I had to do was wait for my family to set fire to the old one. And I knew, with the certainty of a physicist calculating a trajectory, that they would. Their arrogance was the one variable I could always count on. It wasn't about revenge. It was about creating a new reality, one based on a blueprint they had never even bothered to look at. The first move was almost laughably simple. On the 29th day after I walked out of Rhodes Imports, I sent a single carefully worded email. It wasn't a sales pitch. It wasn't a plea. It was a declaration. I sent it to a group of 20 email addresses. Elena in Tuscany, Tiago in Porto, Callum in Scotland, and 17 others. These were my people. The subject line was simply, a new chapter. The body of the email was just 3 sentences. I have begun a new venture, built on the principles of partnership and respect we have always shared. My work continues. The door is open. That was it. I attached a link to the simple, elegant website for Sloane Global Artisans. I didn't ask them to leave Rhodes Imports. I didn't mention my father or my brother. I didn't need to. I hit send, and the silence that followed was filled with potential energy, like the moment of stillness before a lightning strike. I didn't have to wait long. Marco called me the next afternoon, and for the first time, he wasn't whispering. He was audibly struggling not to laugh. He said, "Sloane, you're not going to believe this. It's a bloodbath." The termination notices started coming in this morning. They're all nearly identical. They're citing the relationship integrity clause. Reed is losing his mind. He's been stomping around the office all day. His face is the color of a ripe tomato. He keeps shouting, "What the hell is a key person clause?" He had his legal team on a conference call, and they were trying to explain it to him. Apparently, they admitted they'd seen it in the contracts years ago, but had dismissed it as non-standard but benign. Benign. Can you believe it? I could. It was the perfect encapsulation of their worldview. Anything they didn't understand, anything that centered on relationships rather than pure leverage, was dismissed as harmless fluff. They had looked at the very mechanism of their own undoing and deemed it irrelevant. Marco continued, his voice filled with a kind of grim satisfaction. He said, "Reed tried calling them all personally. Every single one. Most of them didn't even pick up. The few who did were polite, but firm." Tiago's assistant apparently told Reed that Mr. Alves was in a creative session and could not be disturbed, but that his legal representative would be in touch. Elena's son answered the phone and just said, "We only speak with Sloan," and hung up. "It's beautiful, Sloan. It's like watching a symphony you wrote being performed perfectly." And then, just as Marco was finishing his update, my own phone lit up. The caller ID simply said, "Reed." I let it ring for a moment, savoring the vibration in my hand. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and answered. His voice was exactly as I had imagined it would be, a frantic, desperate squeak. "Sloan, what did you do?" The accusation was immediate. The assumption of malice, absolute. He couldn't conceive of a world where this was the natural consequence of his own actions. In his mind, I had to have actively sabotaged him. I kept my voice perfectly level, cool and calm. I said, "I'm not sure what you mean, Reed. I haven't done anything. Don't play dumb with me." He shrieked, a charismatic facade completely shattered, revealing the panicked, entitled man-child beneath. "Our suppliers, they've all left. They terminated their contracts, all of them. The artisans from the Tuscan collection, the ceramics, the woolens, all of them. They said something about a clause. Something about you." I let the silence hang for a beat. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. I replied, "The relationship integrity clause. It's in the contracts. I'm surprised you're not familiar with it. It's been in there for years." What? I don't, our lawyers never said it was a risk," he stammered. "Of course they didn't," I thought, "because you never asked them to assess the risk of you being an incompetent leader." I said, "It wasn't a risk, Reed. It was a guarantee. A guarantee to the artisans that their work and their legacy would be respected. It was a guarantee that the partnership was with a person who understood their value, not just a corporate entity that saw them as a line item on a spreadsheet." He was quiet for a moment, the gears in his head grinding, trying to process a concept that was utterly alien to him. Then, his tone shifted from rage to a desperate, wheedling plea. "Sloan, you have to fix this. Call them. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. Tell them we'll pay more. Whatever they want. Our fall collection is supposed to ship in 2 months. We have millions of dollars in pre-orders from retailers. If we can't deliver, we're finished." The panic was rolling off him in waves. The silent takeover was complete, and it had happened without me firing a single shot. All I had done was open a door, and the very people my family had dismissed as simple craftspeople had, with quiet dignity, chosen to walk through it. They had recognized that the soul of the business had left the building. And now, the body was beginning to collapse. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted like victory. I said, "Reed, I'm afraid I can't help you with that. Those relationships belonged to Rhodes Imports, as long as I was the steward of them. I am no longer with the company. They've made their choice. It's not my place to interfere." "Interfere," he sputtered. "You started this. This is your fault." I could picture him in his large, inherited office, a prisoner in a kingdom he had no idea how to rule. He was surrounded by the trappings of power, the expensive desk, the modern art on the walls, but he was utterly powerless. The vision he was supposed to have was clouding over with the smoke of his own burning empire. And all I had done was stand back and let him light the match. I said, "Reed, I have a client waiting. I'm very busy right now, building my new firm. Maybe you should have your visionary team come up with a solution. I hung up the phone. The quiet in my small office was no longer empty. It was full. It was the sound of leverage, the sound of a board that had been flipped, a game that had been reset. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I was the one deciding the rules. The exodus wasn't a flood. It was a quiet, orderly tide going out, leaving Reed and my father stranded on a barren shore. My email had been the signal, but the actions that followed were born of the artisan's own volition. They didn't just leave Rhodes Imports. They came to me. My inbox began to fill with messages, not of anger towards my old company, but of relief and solidarity. Tiago from Porto wrote, "Sloan, it is good to know where you have landed. A ship is only as good as its captain. We are ready for our next voyage." Elena's son, now managing their communications, sent a simple, powerful note. "Our looms are ready for your orders." My mother sends her warmest regards and says your true home is always open to you. They weren't just suppliers. They were my founding partners. They understood that Sloan Global Artisans wasn't just a new name on an invoice. It was the continuation of a philosophy. My business model was their business model: quality over quantity, partnership over procurement, legacy over profit. Within a week, I had exclusive agreements, drafted on my own terms, with clarity and mutual respect at their core, with every single one of the key artisans who had just abandoned my family's company. Meanwhile, the panic at Rhodes Imports was escalating into a full-blown catastrophe. Marco was my periscope into the sinking ship. He described scenes of sheer chaos. Reed, in a desperate attempt to fill the void, had tried to source cheap knockoffs from mass production factories in Asia. He had even tried to pass off inferior machine-made textiles as Tuscan-inspired. Their long-term clients, the high-end retailers and luxury hotel chains, were not fooled. They were connoisseurs. They knew the feel of Elena's weave, the specific glaze on Tiago's ceramics. The first samples Reed sent out were rejected immediately. One of the biggest department store buyers, a woman I had spent years cultivating a relationship with, reportedly sent back a sample of a machine-made cashmere scarf with a one-word note attached. Insulting. The client exodus began. It started with canceled pre-orders for the fall collection they could no longer produce. Then, the long-term contracts came under review. Why would they stick with a brand that had lost its signature products, its very soul? My phone began ringing, but it wasn't Reed anymore. It was those clients, the department store buyer, the procurement director from the hotel chain. They had heard the whispers on the industry grapevine. They knew the artisans had left. They knew I had started a new firm. They were putting the pieces together. The procurement director, a sharp, no-nonsense man named David, was direct. "Sloan," he said, "I'm not going to beat around the bush. Rhodes Imports is trying to sell me a bill of goods. They've lost their touch. I'm hearing you're the one who always had it. Are you in a position to supply us with the real thing?" This was the moment the power shift became irreversible. I wasn't poaching clients. They were defecting. They were following the quality, and I was the source of that quality. Reed's desperate countermove came about 2 weeks into the crisis. He must have finally swallowed his pride, or more likely, my father forced him to. He called me again. This time, his voice was unnaturally calm, rehearsed. "Sloan," he began, "Dad and I have been talking. We may have been hasty in our decision." I waited, saying nothing. "We want to make you an offer," he continued. "We're prepared to name you Chief Operating Officer, with a significant equity stake, a full partnership. You can run the entire operational side of the business, no questions asked. Just bring the artisans back." It was the offer I would have killed for a year ago. It was everything I had ever wanted, the validation I had craved. But hearing it now, it felt like ash in my mouth. They weren't offering me a promotion because they recognized my worth. They were offering it because their own incompetence had backed them into a corner. They didn't want me. They wanted what I controlled. They still saw me as a function, a tool to be used. The ultimate fixer. They wanted me to clean up their mess. I let him finish his entire desperate pitch. I let him dangle the salary, the title, the corner office. When he was done, the silence stretched on. Finally, I said, calmly and without a trace of emotion, "No thank you, Reed." He was so stunned, he could barely speak. What? What do you mean, no? Sloan, this is everything you. I cut him off. Reed, you and Dad were right. I lack the vision to lead Rhodes Imports. I don't share your forward-thinking dynamism. I was using their own words, the very daggers they had used on me, and turning them back, not with anger, but with a chilling precision. My vision, I continued, is apparently much smaller. It's focused on things like integrity, trust, and keeping promises. It seems my little consulting firm is a much better fit for my limited skill set. But the company, he stammered. Our family's company. It's your company now, Reed. I said, you're the visionary. I'm sure you'll envision a solution. I hung up. That was the final checkmate. The power hadn't just shifted. It had been completely transferred. They had the brand name, the fancy office, the history. I had the entire supply chain, the trust of the clients, and the future. They were a hollowed-out shell, and I was the living, breathing heart that had found a new body. It wasn't about revenge. It was about assuming my rightful place, a place I had to build for myself, because they had been too blind to see it was there all along. The final confrontation wasn't in a boardroom. It was in a place of my choosing. A small, neutral ground coffee shop, halfway between my new office and their crumbling headquarters. My father had requested the meeting. His text message was short, devoid of his usual bluster. "We need to talk." Reed was there, looking pale and diminished. The arrogance had been sandblasted away, leaving behind a brittle, hollow frame. My father, for the first time in my life, looked old. His shoulders were slumped. The tidal wave of his personality had receded, leaving behind a tired old man on a desolate beach. They didn't start with accusations. They started with a stilted, awkward apology. My father cleared his throat and mumbled something about making a mistake, about underestimating my role in the business. Reed just stared at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. It was all too little, too late. Their apology wasn't for the years of being overlooked, for the stolen credit, for the deep, personal wound they had inflicted. It was an apology for getting caught, for the consequences of their own hubris, finally catching up to them. I let them talk. I listened quietly, sipping my tea. Then my father got to the real point of the meeting. He slid a folder across the table. "Sloan," he said, his voice heavy with defeat, "this is a proposal. We want to hire your firm, Sloan Global Artisans, as a consultant, to help us rebuild our supplier relationships." The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with a knife. The woman who lacked the vision to lead was now being asked to save the company she had been cast out from. Reed finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "We'll pay whatever your fee is. We need you to talk to them. They'll listen to you." I opened the folder. It was a standard consulting agreement, hastily drawn up. I scanned the terms, then pushed it back across the table. "My firm's consulting services are in very high demand right now," I said, my voice even and professional. "We're currently focused on establishing exclusive supply chains for our own clients." I paused, letting the weight of that statement land. Our own clients, the clients that used to be theirs. "However," I continued, "I might be able to help you, not as a consultant, but as a potential supplier." Their faces registered confusion. "What do you mean?" my father asked. I leaned forward slightly. "Sloan Global Artisans is now the exclusive North American distributor for a curated collection of Tuscan textiles, Portuguese ceramics, and Scottish woolens, among other things. If Rhodes Imports would like to purchase from us, I'd be happy to have my sales director send you our wholesale catalog and pricing sheet." The new reality slammed into them, with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't coming back to fix their company. I was offering to sell them the very products they used to own, at a significant markup. I was offering them the chance to become my client. Reed's jaw went slack. My father's face, already pale, turned ashen. I stood up, placing a few bills on the table for my tea. It was good to see you both. I looked directly at my father. You told me I lacked the vision to lead. But maybe the problem is that my vision was something you just couldn't see. I then turned to Reed. Good luck with the company, brother. I hope you can manage the logistics. I walked out of the coffee shop and didn't look back. There was no triumph in my steps, no joy in their defeat. There was just a profound sense of balance, of a world that had finally, painstakingly, been set right. The epilogue came about a month later, not from a phone call, but from a press release Marco forwarded to me. The board of directors for Rhodes Imports, a board my father had been forced to create in a desperate bid to secure emergency financing, had voted to remove him as chairman. Reed was stepping down as CEO to pursue other opportunities. The company had been sold for pennies on the dollar to a larger generic home goods conglomerate. They bought the name, and nothing else. The legacy was gone. It had been dismantled, not by me, but by their own hands. It was never about revenge. It was about consequences. My new office isn't large or ostentatious. It's filled with light, and the walls are adorned not with modern art, but with framed photographs of the artisans I work with. Elena in her workshop, Tiago by his kiln, Callum on his misty Scottish hills. On my desk, in a simple silver frame, is the small stiff card Elena sent me. La tua vera casa. Your true home. It's a daily reminder of what I was fighting for. Not a company, not a title, but a principle. The principle that value isn't created in a boardroom. It's created in a workshop. It's built on trust, one relationship at a time. The quiet ones, the ones in the background. We are the architects of that value. And our silence is not weakness. It is focus. It is strength. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. And that's the story. That's how I went from being the forgotten ghost in my family's machine to the architect of my own world. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt and despair that I wouldn't wish on anyone. But what I learned is that your worth isn't determined by the people who refuse to see it. It's determined by you. It's demonstrated in your work, in your integrity, and in the relationships you build. Sometimes, the most powerful vision you can have is the vision to see your own value clearly, even when no one else does. So if you are the quiet one, if you are the one holding the pieces together while someone else takes the bow, I want you to hear this. Your work matters. Your contribution is foundational. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to lead. Don't wait for them to see your vision. Build your own table. Draw your own blueprint. Your greatest power isn't in your voice, it's in your hands, in your mind, in the quiet, consistent, excellent work you do every single day. Trust that. It's the only asset that no one can ever take away from you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt that sting of being underestimated, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Your support truly means the world. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time you turned being underestimated into your greatest strength. I read every single one. Thank you.